Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute just to let everybody filter in. And we'll get started in just about 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes. We'll see. Hope everybody had a lovely summer. Because now it is officially autumn, isn't it? Yeah. Just for those who have arrived so far, this session is going to be recorded. And it will be sent out to everybody that has registered later on today. Welcome, everybody that's just joining now. We'll be starting in just a moment. Just letting everybody in first. Okay, I think we'll, should we get going?
Perfect.
Do you want to move to the first slide?
Oh, okay.
Welcome and thank you all for coming along to today's Lunch and Learn session on Boreout. And before I hand you over to Leanne, just have a few people announcements, because we have some very, very exciting news. As of today, we have now been sharing our new partnership with Wales HR Network. And we have been developing a series of in-person events that are in Cardiff. So if you're in South Wales, then we'd love to invite you to come along. They start in November. Our first session is on recruiting with confidence, which is hosted by Oggy at Hodge House in Cardiff. And in February, we have a focus on employment law at Cardiff Business School. And in May, we will be on the panel discussing how to create healthier workplace cultures. And the last session, the last event in the series, will take place in September. We're still just ironing out some of those details, but it will be on a session on AI and technology and how that is transforming the workplace. So I will, when I hand over to Leanne, I will put these links in the chat so you're able to reserve your tickets as well, because once the press release goes fully live and that's sent out, we're anticipating these tickets are going to go out pretty fast. So get your ticket before you miss out, especially the May one. No favourites. We will be at all of them, and we can't wait to meet you all in person as well. Okay. So that's it from me right now. So I'm going to hand over to Leanne so we can get started on the Boreout session.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always really lovely to be with you all. And it's always a bit of a shock at how quickly these monthly Lunch and Learn sessions come around. So this is a topic I've been speaking on for about 12 months. And every single time I talk about this topic, people are intrigued, people haven't heard of it. And then when I start to explain it, people resonate with it really clearly. And so I want to share everything that we're going to cover on this topic. First and foremost, as I always say, for you and your benefit. But if you are someone who's supporting other people, whether that's in HR, whether you manage a team, then it's something that would be really useful for you to be aware of. So before we get into the topic today, just for those of you who are first time here at one of our Lunch and Learns, so Tom and I actually run an organisation called Beam Development and Training. Beam Training deliver leadership, wellbeing and personal development training in organisations all around the world. We train in 45 countries. I keep saying 45. It was 45 a few years ago. I think it's probably more than that now. And we help people, whether that's helping them understand and manage stress better, whether it's creating more cohesive teams, whether it's topics like anxiety or confidence or imposter syndrome. And we're really passionate about not just helping people feel empowered to understand these key topics, but to really give them practical tools and techniques to take away. And we created People a year ago. It's almost a year to the day that we did our first free lunch and learn session. Really, because we work so much with people who look after other people. And what we saw over and over and over again was they were passionate and enthusiastic about supporting the people they care about, but they weren't always great at supporting themselves. And so that was essentially the mission of People. It has, in the last year, we've had more than 1,000 people sign up to our lunch and learns. We have created our People magazine, which we are always looking for contributors for. So if you have an interesting topic you would like to talk about that relates to anyone in a people-centric role, get in touch with Tom and he will let you know how you can submit an article. And as Tom said, we are now stepping into starting to bring some in-person events together with Wales HR Network, Darwin Gray, and Acorn as well. So there's a lot going on, as you can understand and imagine. But what we definitely do not want to lose sight of is that we created this whole network to support you, and to try and do that in as many ways as we can, in as either free as we can or certainly as cost effective as we can. And so this session today is one of those exact tools. So as I say, this is all about something that is called Boreout, which is a topic that a lot of people haven't heard of. They're not entirely sure what it is. So we're going to first of all get a better understanding of it, learn to recognize it, learn actually what the differences are between bore out and burnout, look at some of the causes, and then importantly, share with you some practical tools to support yourself or people in your team who may be struggling with it. So let's start with getting a better understanding of what bore out is. So the term came from a book written in 2007. And actually, it didn't really gain as much momentum in the beginning as it's starting to gain now. Certainly post-pandemic, Boreout is something that I'm hearing more and more. And it's essentially the awareness from Verda and Rothlin that some people started to experience emotional, mental, and physical discomfort because of a state of demotivation and dissatisfaction, because they don't find any meaning or challenge in the tasks they do at work. It's a form of psychological distress caused by chronic boredom, lack of engagement. Understimulation is certainly a key thing we see very often when we're helping organizations. And that can lead to both physical and mental health issues. And it's really interesting because when we talk about bore out in this term, it's perhaps not something we've ever considered as something that could negatively impact our well-being or the well-being of those we're looking after. But in my opinion, I think that bore out is just as detrimental, just as harmful, and just as hard to overcome as burnout is. And if you join me last month, I talked about burnout, so this is a great follow-on from that. So burnout tends to occur from overwork. Bore out tends to stem from understimulation. So burnout is too much and bore out is too little. So I want to first of all share with you the differences so we can just become more aware of what it looks like. So, all of my slides, there we go. So first of all, let's look at the symptoms. So bore out shows up as a lack of motivation, feeling undervalued. It can really start to impact someone in terms of their mental well-being, their definition of themselves, their self-belief, their self-confidence. Boreout tends to show up as emotional and physical exhaustion. It can cause detachment. So we start to feel as though, what's the point? Anything I do doesn't really have impact, or I might even start to care less. And it's a result of overwhelming chronic stress. So it's really quite impactful, both of them. The affected demographics of Boreout. My slides have gone really funny today. So the affected demographics of Boreout and burnout is really interesting because there is a differentiation. So Boreout, we tend to see much more in roles that are repetitive, tasks that have low or little stimulation. That bit makes sense. But we actually see Boreout occur more in younger employees. They're likely to become more vulnerable to it. And one of the significant thoughts for that is that often a younger employee will come in at a lower level within the organization and maybe given more repetitive, mundane, low stimulation tasks. Whilst actually inside they're hungry, they've got this desire to learn, this desire to grow. And so that hunger inside isn't being satisfied by the nourishment of the work they're doing. And I can really give you a personal anecdote for this. I remember in my very first career role, I went into HR, and one of the kind of drawbacks, I guess, of working in HR is you get to see what everyone else in the organization is rewarded for, what they're paid. And as a very kind of young and keen 21-year-old, I remember feeling that I was being given tasks like, booking rooms and setting up induction training and photocopying. And I felt like I was capable of so much more. And when I looked around, I felt like other people were getting those opportunities that I wasn't getting. And I was very fortunate at that time that I had a really lovely mentor that I went to see, and I had a chat with him. And I was telling him about how frustrating it was and how hungry I was, and they weren't using my skills. And this lovely mentor gave me a piece of advice that has always stuck with me. And I've actually used it on younger people that have felt the same over my years. And he said to me in his very thick Welsh accent, he said, Leanne, life's a marathon, not a sprint. You'll get there, just take your time. And as a hungry 21-year-old that was feeling bored, wasn't feeling challenged, it wasn't the advice I wanted to hear in that moment. But actually, as someone who then matured and saw that I needed that foundational training, I needed that experience to get to where I wanted to go, it was some of the best advice I've ever received. So if you're looking after a team, it's really useful to be mindful of those perhaps younger employees that you've got that are kind of getting those foundation skills and need to do that. But actually, where can you give them a project? Where can you give them something they can get stuck into and feel valued and get that sense of reward and recognition? Burnout is really persistent chronic stress. So we tend to see burnout much more in people who are in very demanding roles. I know certainly in my role as a one-to-one therapeutic coach, when I think back to people I've helped through burnout, they are chief executives, lawyers, accountants, head teachers, lecturers, people who are really doing amazing in their career, but aren't very good at being able to compartmentalize, aren't very good at being able to care for themselves. They're constantly taking on more and more and more. And that becomes incredibly draining and exhausting. Now, when I talked about burnout in the last session, and if you missed it, all of our sessions are recorded, so you can go onto our website and access that quite easily. But I talked about how burnout is really insidious, that it creeps up on us. You don't have one busy week at work and suffer with burnout. it's this persistent, insidious, taking on more and more, blurring your boundaries, not saying no, that eventually starts to cause us to experience this symptom of burnout. So, what does it look like? How do we recognize this in ourselves and others? Well, one of the first things, which actually can happen in burnout as well, is a sense of mental and physical fatigue. However, in burnout, the mental and physical fatigue is usually because of overworking your brain. So, we talked last time about the cognitive load we carry, the amount of things that are going on in our brain. I know when I start to feel that, I often talk about having lots of files open in my brain, and they're all open and I need to close some of them. You know, there's a file for that therapy client, there's a file for that training client, there's a file for my mother, there's a file for my best friend, there's files for so many things. And somewhere in the background, there's probably a radio on as well. And that's incredibly draining. But with Boreout, the mental and physical fatigue tends to come more from monotony, lack of stimulation rather than overstimulation. And if you've ever been in a role, and I'm sure there's people here who would have incredible stories to tell where they felt that they're just not being challenged. It's the same thing. It's very routine. Perhaps you have a manager that micromanages you and doesn't give you any responsibility. Then you will know how mentally and physically draining that can be to keep showing up. There's also a sense of a decreased motivation and engagement. So you might notice yourself or employees start to quickly lose interest in their tasks, maybe showing some indifference or some reluctance to work towards a project or any kind of work-related goal. It might feel that it's just a little bit pointless. They might not see the value in the task you're giving them. They might feel that it's all a bit menial, or dare we even say sometimes we feel that things are beneath us and that we're not, we've trained or we've studied to be worthy of something more. We can then start to engage in time wasting strategies. Now, this is usually a coping mechanism initially, particularly if you have a very monotonous job where you're not being challenged. And those strategies can develop into anything from checking emails excessively, just constantly open them, being happy when you've got a spam email that there's something there, taking longer breaks, or maybe showing up a bit late or starting to leave a little bit earlier, or really dragging out tasks unnecessarily because, well, I've got this task and I don't know what my task will be after it, so I'm going to make this really last. What this can then do to the individual is start to create some feelings of worthlessness. So prolonged understimulation, prolonged lack of purpose can lead to a loss of self-esteem, and it can cause us to question our professional purpose. And actually, I would argue that when I've seen Boreout in action, it doesn't just make someone doubt themselves professionally, it makes them start to doubt themselves entirely as a valuable human being. That sense of worthlessness can really grow and fester. And then that can create cognitive symptoms. So cognitive symptoms are things like struggling to concentrate, procrastinating. Maybe you just find that your mind is always wandering. Maybe you're always counting down to the weekend, counting down to your next holiday. That lack of focus and concentration is really, really common in Boreout. Now, I'm sure that there are probably some people on this call right now who see these and think, oh my goodness, I'm either there right now or I know I've been there in the past. Or maybe you're thinking about a specific team member and think, oh, wow, I think they might be struggling with this. I think they might not feel engaged, might not have a motivation to achieve. So, what's the impact of that? If we are in an organization where we have employees that are struggling with Boreout, then actually the impact is really big. So persistent disengagement, persistent feelings of worthlessness, persistent lack of purpose can absolutely impact our overall mental health. Purpose is one of the key predictors in us having positive mental health. When we have a lack of purpose, it very often can lead to us feeling a sense of depression. If we have these pervasive feelings of what we do doesn't matter, then we start to feel a sense of dissatisfaction, not just at work, but in our life overall. There was a study in the UK that found that Boreout had a direct impact on mental well-being, where employees were reporting higher levels of stress and emotional fatigue when they weren't feeling challenged at work. And that's maybe so contradictory to how we usually think of our employees when we think of stress. We usually think of stress as in we're overburdened, we're giving them too much to do. But we can also feel stressed when we don't feel like we have enough to do or we're not engaged. It can also cause a reduced productivity, not just from the individual, but actually that can filter into teams as well. A bored and disengaged employee is less likely to perform optimally. They're likely to miss deadlines. They're likely to make errors, which seems again counterintuitive. If they've got plenty of time to do a task, surely they shouldn't make errors. But if that task is monotonous, repetitive, they don't see the purpose in it, then there's likely to be errors and overall a lower output level. This can then start to spread into the entire culture of the workplace, causing a negative workplace atmosphere. It can foster negativity, disengagement. If you start to notice there are people in the team that are disengaged, that perhaps are dragging a task out and taking a long time doing it, and you feel that actually you've got lots to work on, it can start to create a culture of imbalance, a sense of unfairness, a sense of, well, they're taking their time with it. Maybe I'll start taking my time with it. And as many of you will know, there will be lots of culture experts on this call, undoubtedly, that the culture really is created by what is done repeatedly. That level of negativity, disengagement starts to decrease team morale, starts to then kind of impact with collaboration. There might be a blame culture. It might impact psychological safety. People might not feel safe to speak up. And that can cause an increased turnover. So, turnover in employment, by the way, not turnover in finances. So if people perceive there's a lack of opportunity, a lack of fulfillment, a lack of career growth, and all that they have available to them are these disengaging roles, then of course there's likely to be a higher employee turnover, which, as you know, will cost the organization time, resources, and money in recruitment, training, and retention. So actually, Boreout is something that every organization needs to care about, needs to be concerned about. So let's just go into a little bit more detail of the causes of Boreout. I've hinted on quite a lot of them, but let's just make sure we're really clear. So a key reason for Boreout is a lack of meaningful tasks. Now, I don't know, there's many people here that have a variety of different careers, but I want you to think back to perhaps one of the first jobs you ever did. Perhaps you had a Saturday job, or it was your first inroad into your career. And there were probably tasks that you had to do that someone didn't explain to you the reason you had to do it. It just had to be done. When we can't find meaning in what we're doing, we become really disengaged. So even if there are repetitive, sometimes tedious, boring jobs that need to be done, then creating meaning will help that person feel more engaged in that. And I'll explain that in a bit when I talk about job crafting. We might just not be using the skills of the people we have effectively. Maybe you've got someone who's a real people person and they're in a role where they don't get much people contact. The role itself might be interesting for someone who doesn't want to be engaging with people all the time, but for a people person, you're not using their skills. We need to make sure that we're trying to match the skills that we have available to us with the appropriate jobs. A sense of a lack of purpose. Now, I've already hit on this, so it's something that massively impacts our mental health. Human beings have to feel like they're contributing to something, ideally something bigger than ourselves. Now, for many of us, we find our meaning and purpose from work, from our careers. But if someone can't find that in their work and careers, and then perhaps aren't finding it in other areas as well, perhaps they don't have much meaning in their home life as well, then that can start to create poor mental health. And then giving someone repetitive tasks. So those repetitive tasks, especially without meaning, and especially not using someone's skill, can cause us to feel incredibly bored and disengaged. So you can see how this all starts to add up and how actually there are lots of workplace environments where bore-out would be a real warning factor. In manufacturing, in roles where tasks are really repeated, then bore-out is something we need to be really mindful of and try and deal with. So how do we deal with it? This is the important bit, really. This is the important slide. So wherever possible in yourself or in the team that you're looking after, add variety. Adding variety to the work can help break monotonous tasks. It can rekindle engagement. So many of our roles become routine over time, even very complicated roles. If we've done them over and over and over again, it can start to be done on autopilot. There's a really fascinating university study by Duke University that finds that all of us spend about 40% of our waking day on autopilot, essentially doing things that we've done every single day without really conscious engagement. Now, in terms of cognitive load, that's actually really useful. If I don't have to think about something I've done countless times, then I'm saving brain energy. However, in terms of our engagement with our life, if I'm doing something really repetitive that doesn't require me to step in and consciously think about it now and again, and I'm on autopilot, then it becomes incredibly boring, very demotivating, and a total lack of stimulation. So how do we put this into context? Well, imagine you're in a role where your primary purpose is perhaps data. Think about how you could add purpose to that. Maybe add in brainstorming session to improve how that data processing happens. Or maybe given an extra project to encourage a sense of creativity and ownership. Maybe have a knowledge sharing session where people can share best practice and they can feel like they're impacting and supporting each other. All of that takes a very monotonous task like data entry, and it starts to bring a little bit of a fresh challenge and engagement, breaking out of that routine. Take some time for reflection. So reflection is a powerful way to reconnect with our purpose and gauge some satisfaction. We can reflect on tasks, we can reflect on goals, we can reflect on our long-term career plans, we can reflect on how we're impacting other people. It helps to create a sense of growth, even if we're in a very static role. So set a time aside every week where you journal or write down what went well, what was fulfilling, areas that you want to work on, areas that you want to grow with. Perhaps you found out that a challenging interaction with a colleague or a client actually taught you something. It taught you to manage your stress. It taught you to consider other people's opinions. Reflection is really an opportunity to see what's going well, to take the good parts out of something that could be boring, and then to move forward. Create meaningful connections. Human beings just do not thrive if we don't have meaningful social connections. At Beam, we talk a lot about the importance of social connections. If you want to be resilient, you need good social connections. If you want positive mental health, you need good social connections. There are so many aspects of our mental well-being that need good social connections. And connecting with our colleagues is something that is pretty crucial because we spend so much time in contact with them. So, encouraging people to connect with their colleagues on a deeper level can transform their entire work experience. It can add meaning and purpose to that day. It can reduce feelings of isolation or loneliness or like it's just happening to me. So maybe there's opportunities to bring teams together. Again, that's sharing a best practice, taking time to have one-to-one chats to get to know each other. We have recently launched a new leadership program with an organization at Beam. And the first icebreaker question that we started with, I might ask you to do this in the chat box actually, just as a little icebreaker. But the first icebreaker question we started with in this leadership program was to ask people who they admire and why. And as we've done that, we've had all sorts of things. We've had people talk about their granny. We've had people talk about author or a teacher. We've had people talk about, one was Chris Hemsworth, although I think that lady admired him for slightly different reasons to what we were trying to get to. But the whole benefit of that, and we've done that within all of the cohorts that we're working with on this leadership program. And what we found is that it starts to open up a dialogue of knowing your colleagues better on a deeper level. And I had one of the managers come up to me at the end and they said, I'm just blown away by that who do you admire question. He said, I've worked here for 22 years, I think it is. And I've worked with a lot of these people for that amount of time. And I've learned something about those people today that I had no idea about. I didn't know they were going through that challenge. I didn't know that they were caring for a parent or that their child had some kind of neurodiversity. All of these things that came out from this really simple, meaningful question. I can see you're all a bit shy, so you're not going to tell me who you admire and why. But if you want to, the chat box is open, so feel free to share. And then the final tool to combat Boreout is job crafting. I'm not sure if any of you have ever come across job crafting, but it is a really powerful way to interpret the work that we all do. It initially comes from the work from a behavioral psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And Csikszentmihalyi talks about how we can view the work we do in one of three ways. So we can view our work as a job, which is essentially I'm doing it because it gives me money, it pays the bills, and I need to be here. We can view the work that we do as a career, which is I'm definitely still doing it because it helps pay the bills, but also there's a sense of personal growth and development as well. I'm moving forward. There's an opportunity for me to learn. There's an opportunity for me to progress. And then the third way he describes work is a calling. And when we often think of a calling, we tend to think of these really big kind of life-changing purposes to our life. So often we hear stories of amazing people who have had a calling to build a school in Africa or go and save this really rare, nearly extinct animal. And of course, that's incredible. But most of us don't have a calling like that. A calling is something that you feel that you are called to do, so much so that even if you didn't get paid for it, you'd still want to be involved in it. And what the research shows is that this has nothing to do with the job that we do. This has nothing to do with the amount that we earn. This is all about how we craft that job, how we think of our work. So you could be a brain surgeon and actually see that work as a job. You're doing it because you've trained, it's really good money, and that's it. Equally, and one of the lovely stories that she sent me, I talked about, is you could be a school caretaker, and this was someone he interviewed who absolutely loved his job and showed up with passion all the time when he was doing his job. And when interviewed, they asked this caretaker, who basically was just cleaning floors and emptying bins and tidying up, why they were so passionate about their job. And he literally described his job as a calling. And he said that what I do is really important because I'm creating a safe, healthy environment for the next brain surgeon, for the next president, for the next political leader to get really good education and to become the best version of themselves. Now, that is job crafting in a nutshell. The tasks that he had to do could easily have been seen by many as a job. I'm doing it because it pays my bills. But that caretaker had seen so much value in what he was doing that it wasn't even a career, it was a calling. It was something that he wanted to do, even if he didn't get paid for it. And this is something I really want to leave you all with, really, is this idea of where you see your own work right now. There's no right or wrong answer, and I won't get you to share because we're all in different organizations and we haven't kind of created that level of psychological safety. But think about the work you're doing right now. Is it a job? Is it a career? Or is it a calling? Now, the interesting thing about Csikszentmihalyi's research is we can actually craft whatever we're doing to turn it into a calling right now. So we can see that there's lots and lots of HR people in this role, in this room right now. So we can take that as a HR role, and let's just say you're a HR manager, and you could say that this is a job. You're here, you get paid, that's it. I think a lot of you would probably describe being a HR manager as a career. You've already progressed, and probably many of you have ideas and aspirations for further progression. You have progressed professionally and no doubt personally as well. You've learned a lot of things. But how would you turn your job as a HR manager into a calling? I think that's really easy. You are impacting people's lives on a daily basis. You give people the opportunity to work their way into a career that will forever define who they are. You give people the opportunity to be safe, to be seen, be heard. You give people the opportunity to be who they want to be in an environment that lets them flourish, that lets them bring that stuff out of them. So one of the bits of homework I want to leave you with is to spend some time over the next week thinking about your specific job right now and crafting it into your calling. Doesn't mean you won't change, doesn't mean you don't have other goals and aspirations, but craft your job right now into a calling for the future. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We now know that Boreout is a form of workplace disengagement. It tends to come from understimulation, lack of challenges, lack of purpose. It's different to burnout, which is because of excessive overload, and it's much more about under rather than over. But both of them can lead to negative mental and physical health impacts. We've looked at the symptoms and the impact of Boreout. We know that symptoms are things like chronic boredom, low motivation, a sense of purposelessness. Gosh, that's a big word. We've looked at the symptoms, things like increase in depression and anxiety, reduced productivity, dissatisfaction in work and at home. And we know that that can impact us and the organization. Some of the causes of bore-out, things like repetitive tasks, lack of skill utilization, mismatching people in their jobs. And then we've looked at tools to combat bore-out. So job crafting, setting some goals, increasing collaboration and engagement, self-reflection, encouraging people to think of best practice and share that, essentially empowering individuals. So I will hand back over to Tom to wrap up, but if there are any questions, please pop them in the chat box and I will come to them. I want to have a little read about some of your role models in the meantime. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for that session. Yeah, so all the resources and the replay from today's session will be sent out later. I'll also send you a sheet with the exercise or homework that Leanne set as well, so you can actively complete that exercise. There'll also be links on how you can book a session with us if you need any additional support. I've also put a link in the chat to join the LinkedIn group if you haven't, and if you would like to join our community there. You'll also be able to join us, and I'll add the link in the chat in just a moment, on the 7th of October, which is our next People session, and it's all about kindness, which is a fantastic session. And Leanne, next slide. So we also have, which is next week, it's our specialist session, and we have invited the wonderful Emily Meredith, who is the group head of Acorn by Synergy, and she is going to be delivering us a session on, and I think she's got a colleague coming along with her as well, beyond the CV. So the importance of choosing the right candidate, especially with all of the changes that are going on in business and HR and recruitment right now. This is a really practical, insightful session designed to help hiring managers and HR professionals and business leaders navigate those recruitment challenges and hiring better choices from the very first step. When we spoke to Emily, she told us some really wonderful and interesting and funny stories that all go behind the recruitment process that is just really important elements of whether you are looking for your next position or if you're in that position and need some extra support for finding the right candidates as well. So thank you all for coming along. I know there has been some activity in the chat function as well. So what I think we'll do is we'll, after the next slide, we will probably just stop the recording. So if anyone wants to stick around for some discussion, then we can do without it being recorded. So on the final slide, we have links to connect with either Leanne or myself. If you have any questions, drop me a message. If you wanted to be a part of the People magazine as well, deadline for that is 17th of September. So there's still time for the October magazine. So thank you very much for coming along. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, but the meeting will still continue. Thank you.
Perfect.